Hi, in our last session, we talked a little bit about an introduction to prayer walking. We talked about why we do prayer walking. I gave a few examples. But I want to go a little bit deeper now on prayer walking and really just talk to you about some of the elements of prayer walking. There are three R's that I want you to remember when you do prayer walking. And we're getting deeper than prayer walking. I'm starting to get into exegeting your context. But really, one of the best tools in exegeting your context is prayer walking. But some of the things I'm talking about now can go beyond prayer walking. But when you're prayer walking, keeping it to prayer walking, there are three R's that I want you to remember when you're prayer walking. Three R's of three R's that typify three different kinds of insights. So, number one, you're looking for responsive insight. Now, what do I mean by responsive insight? Responsive insight is what you smell, what you see, what you hear, what you feel, what you taste. I encourage people when they're prayer walking to stop at some of the taquerias or the different restaurants and sample the food. That helps you get to know the neighborhood. So what you taste, what you smell, what you hear, what you feel, what you see, you might be seeing signs in different languages, or you might be hearing different languages as you're walking. You're hearing somebody speaking in Vietnamese, or you see a sign in Russian, or you smell. If you come to my neighborhood, you will smell a lot of curry. The reason is there's a big Indian population in my neighborhood. You'll also smell a lot of weed, marijuana, because people are smoking a lot of dope in my neighborhood. So you get to kind of understand what's inside this neighborhood as you prayer walk it. So, number one is responsive insight. Number two is revealed insight. It's not about what you're seeing, smelling, hearing, tasting, and feeling, but it's what is the Holy Spirit saying as you're walking in that neighborhood or across that city or in your company or at the university campus? What is it that what is it that the Lord is saying to you? So you might be walking through a very peaceful neighborhood, but you just feel this sense of violence or abuse. And it's an indication from the Lord that there may be a lot of domestic violence going on, or you feel darkness and depression and death. And it may be because in that beautiful, peaceful, palatial neighborhood, there's a lot of teenage suicides that are going on. And it tells you a lot about the neighborhood and the families that are in there. So you want to be really sensitive to what you're hearing the Lord say. And then the third one, which I'm going to spend a little time on now, is what we call revealed insight. I'm not sorry, not revealed insight. I'm sorry, researched insight. So, researched insight comes through reading books or being on the internet or reading newspapers or watching the television and gleaning. And I want to give you 5 P's of how to glean information. Uh, there are 5 P's. I'm going to do them real fast and then I'll go through them slowly. So the pains, the problems, the peoples, the powers, and the potentials of your city, your neighborhood, your university, or your company. What are the pains? What are the problems? Who are the peoples? what are the powers and what are the potentials of that city, neighborhood, university, or company where you are. So, number one, the pains. Pains are the things that are manifested in society because of rejection. So, when you're walking or when you're reading the newspaper or listening to the political debates or you're doing some demographic research, what are the pains? Is there a high rate of domestic violence? Is there a high rate of suicide? Is there a lot of drug dealing that's going on? Is there a lot of depression? Is there a lot of poverty? Poverty may go into the next category too. Some of these interrelate. But what are the pains of your area? When I was in Chennai and Madras, India, dowry deaths were a big problem, and that was one of the pains because of the caste system. So it could be all different things. I can't tell you about your area, but what are the things that are manifested because of rejection? Number two, what are the problems? Now, problems are the things that are caused in society because of a lack of engagement by the government or by the church or by civic community groups and community involvement. So it could be things like the high cost of housing, like here in San Francisco. Here in the city, it could be the high cost of housing, or it could be not as many police as you hear the siren going off in the background. I'm sure you hear it through the video. I'm sitting in the backyard of the YWAM base in downtown San Francisco. So what are the problems? It could be not enough toilets. When I was in Madras, there was one toilet for every 3,000 students in corporation schools. Now that's a problem. Defecation on the streets causes a lot of disease. When I moved here to San Francisco in the neighborhood where I am right now, that's the same problem we have here. In the neighborhood where I am, there are not toilets for the unhoused. So they defecate and urinate on the sidewalks. That has led us as YWAM to open up our showers and our toilets in the weekdays. And it is a ministry of hospitality. So what are the problems? It could be unemployment. Third, who are the peoples? And I'm going to get into this a little bit later with some illustrations, but who are the peoples that are in your university or in your neighborhood or in your village or in your city or in your company? When I say peoples, I especially mean who are the peoples beyond the reach of the local church. When I moved here to San Francisco and I started prayer walking my neighborhood, I noticed right on the next block of the YWAM Center was an Om symbol from India on a building. And I went over to that building and I found out that that building was a Gujarati mandal. Gujaratis are people from the state of Gujarat, north of Bombay in Western India. And the Gujaratis are one of the most unreached people groups in the world. And they had a mandal in my neighborhood. A mandal is where they come to celebrate their weddings and Diwali and all the different Indian festivals. And I asked myself, why is there a Gujarati mandal here? And I began to find out through research that all the hotels are owned in the city. Most of them are owned by a group called the Patels, who come from Gujarat. In fact, most of the motels in America are owned by the Patels. We call it the Patel Motel Cartel. And here it was in my neighborhood. And I began to realize, oh, there's a lot of Patels that are here in the neighborhood, which is a tremendous way to begin to think, how can I pray in church planters to reach this unreached people group at my doorstep? As I walked through the neighborhood, I noticed liquor stores on all the corners, and the liquor stores were owned by Arabic speaking people. I could see it on their signboards. I could see it when I went in and bought things and listening to them talking to one another in Arabic. Many of our storekeepers come from Yemen. In fact, we have 1,000 Yemeni living in our neighborhood, 4 blocks from our front door, and not one single missionary reaching out to the Yemeni in the whole city of San Francisco, besides my wife, who has made friends with the Yemeni women, and she has tremendous relationships with them, going into their homes and discussing faith with them and eating together and attending their birthday celebrations and visiting them in the hospital and helping them with immigration issues. So what are the pains? What are the problems? Who are the peoples? And then fourth, who are the powers? When I mean powers, I don't mean just the good powers. I mean also the bad powers. But talking about the good powers, who's your mayor? And not only who's your mayor, who's your police department captain? I chair the Community Police Advisory Board here in my neighborhood, and the captain and I are friends. And I go to all of his meetings, and he asked me for input. And not only the mayor, not only the police, but then who are your community organizers? Those that are really mobilizing for good and sometimes for bad inside the neighborhood. So I'm friends with different community organizers. I sit on the board of Market Street for the Masses, and we are dealing with issues of gentrification and poverty and racism when it comes to housing. And so I've made friends with some of the organizers in the neighborhood. In fact, just yesterday, I emailed 2 of them asking them for advice on how to vote, not in the presidential election, but in the San Francisco local election on some very, very tricky issues. So it could be good powers. It could be people that have power in a bad way, the occult, witches, or palm readers. And my advice is not to go with a Bible and chase them out of your neighborhood. Go make friends with them and get to know them and tell them about Jesus and engage with them. And then lastly is the potentials. And the potentials really deal with what is the redemptive gift of your company, your neighborhood, your city, or your university. What is the redemptive gift? San Francisco, the redemptive gift of this city is innovation. We're always innovating. We're always creating something new. We're always trying to find the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow. And it's a city that exports all of that goodness, or sometimes the evilness also, to the whole world. That has been going on for decades. So the potentials are repeating patterns of goodness that come out. It also may deal with how many churches are in your city. You know, I have a little equation that I work with that I learned from Dawn, which stands for discipling a whole nation. They say for a church to be saturated with the gospel, there should be one church for every 1,000 people. That doesn't mean that all 1,000 people go to the church, but for every 1,000 people, there should be one church. Well, you know, you can go to some very church cities that have lots of churches. Now, that may not mean that the city is discipled. A lot of those churches may be sleeping or may be dead, but it still gives you an indication of the history of that city and it gives you a present temperature of that city. Now, I can take you to a very dark city like Calcutta, India, one of my favorite cities in the world. There's 16 million people in Calcutta. One church for 1,000 people means there should be 16,000 churches in the city for it to be saturated with churches. Here's the question: how many churches are in Calcutta? Well, last time I checked, which was quite a few years ago, there were 300. That tells you how dark that city is. Where is at Chennai, Madras, where I was living, a city of 8 million, therefore one church per 1,000 should have 8,000 people, 8,000 churches. We had 3,000 churches in our city. So the difference between Calcutta and Chennai was very, very, very vast. Calcutta, you could feel the darkness. And Chennai, even though being a very Orthodox Hindu city, you could feel the heavens have been broken because of the presence of the church. Now, that doesn't mean that all the churches were active discipling churches, but the fact that we had 3,000 churches back in the time when I was there, there's many more now, means that there was an open heaven. So I'd like to stop here, and I'd like you to break into groups or to talk to one another or to think about your place and think, what are the pains? What are the problems? Who are the peoples? What are the potentials? And what are the powers? I'm sorry, I did those two ones in reverse, the powers and the potentials. Also think about when you have done prayer walking, when have you saw responsive insight? And when have you felt revealed insight about your location? And take some time and discuss that. And then we'll come back and I'll try to give you some do's and don'ts on prayer walking.